like mysterious lights out of the darkness of the unknown. Or at least so they seem to us. The UFOs, the flying saucers. Most scientists, however, remain skeptical. They speak mostly of unexplained phenomena, of optical illusions, or refer to the secret research carried out during the period of the Third Reich. A documentary of mystical stories. What's more, these phenomena are even mentioned in the German Armed Forces technical manuals. As a matter of fact, the world's first reported UFO sighting seemed to confirm this theory. On the 14th of December, 1944, Reuters reported in the New York Times, "A mysterious illuminated ball is the latest Nazi air warfare weapon. This means that towards the end of the Second World War, Germany was in possession of a secret weapon which displayed all the typical characteristics of a UFO." Our quest for German UFOs has been extremely difficult. We gathered together mysterious reports and stories, underground literature, photographs, sketches, and fragments of handwriting, and we tried to make contact with individuals who had been involved with the former secret societies Thule and Vril, as well as the Black Sun organization. The first part of our puzzle took us to pre-First World War Vienna, where all sorts of esoteric, occult, and Sumerian ideas and material were circulating. Ideas which would later be taken up by the Third Reich, and with them the vision of a new and unconventional technology. It was a period which witnessed an enormous blossoming of various secret doctrines and orders: Templars and Rosicrucians, Illuminati and Freemasons, Anthroposophists, Theosophists, Neo-Templars and Armanen. Some of them seemed suddenly to have woken up after a centuries-long sleep. What had disturbed their slumber was this: the impending arrival of the prophesied New Age, the changeover from the age of Pisces to the Aquarian Age. Every one of these groups felt themselves called upon to make their mark on the approaching era. At the beginning, heretical theologians as well as Oriental, Nordic, and Atlantis scholars all worked in concert, fascinated by one goal: the new Golden Age. A young man came into contact with all these secret teachings in Vienna: Adolf Hitler. He read all the books and other literature he could find on these subjects. Hitler soon evolved a vision whereby he realized the world would have to be reforged to pave the way for a new age. The way was now marked out for the steps he would take. The sole power that seeks renewal and yet creates destruction. In 1917, 4 men and a woman met here in the Viennese cafe Schopenhauer. The young Maria Ortiz, a spiritualistic medium from Zagreb, the student and fighter pilot Lothar Weitz, the occultist, orientalist, and officer Karl Haushofer, Rudolf von Sebottendorf, an occultist who had recently returned from the Orient, as well as Prelate Gernot from the Order of Knights Templar. Their subject was the coming of the New Age. They spoke of secret revelations, the Spear of Destiny, the magical violet black stone. They discussed the possibility of making transmedial contact with the ancient Germanic and Babylonian deities, Ishtar, Ostara, and Isais. Quite likely that this coffeehouse meeting witnessed the birth of the secret Thule Society, which in turn later spawned the German National Socialist Party, the SS, Black Sun, and the Vril Society, which in its turn gave a foundation to the occult activities of the Third Reich and the new comprehensive technology. And the beginning of German UFOs. What was the secret behind it all? The invincible source of power for them was the Black Sun, an infinite beam of light which, although invisible to the human eye, was nevertheless there and very real. Just as the bright daylight sun can illuminate the exterior, so the dark sun can light up the soul of man. It illuminates the divine light. To this very day, the occult philosophy of the Third Reich is veiled under a thick cloud of mystery and secrecy. Its leaders were drawn from the ranks of the Thule Society and the SS. In many ways, their ideas differed significantly from the accepted National Socialist Party line. Their emblem was the black sun. A secret philosophy thousands of years old provided the foundation on which the occult practitioners of the Third Reich would later build. The black sun symbol can be found in many Babylonian and Assyrian places of worship. Even the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians knew of the symbol and the beliefs that it represented. The Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations often depicted the black sun, the Godhead's inner light, in the form of a cross. Assyrian kings wore an insignia which in no way differed from the one more commonly known as the German Knight's Cross. No way of knowing just what exactly was going on in the minds of the occultists of the Third Reich, and to what mysterious ends their ideas would lead them. Perhaps they believed in the ancient prophecy of the New Babylon, which would rise again in some unspecified centrally located country when the third Sargon would return. The secret knowledge and the prophecies which the Knights Templar had brought back with them from the Orient had been slumbering for centuries, waiting for the time of fulfillment to approach. In 1919, von Sebottendorf joined with Karl Haushofer and Dietrich Eckart to form the Thule Society. This was to be a melting pot of various occult orders, with a network of connections throughout Germany. The center was to be in Munich. Many members of the Thule Society formed themselves in active opposition to the short-lived Socialist Republic of Bavaria. A political party was founded, and in 1921, Adolf Hitler, a man well known for his occult beliefs, was engaged as a political orator. Inspired by members of the Thule Society, Hitler's plan for a 1,000-year Reich was born. The increasing political ambitions of the Thule Society resulted in a number of smaller groups going their own way. One of these groups was the Vril Society. Towards the end of 1919, a select group of people, members of both the Thule and Vril societies, met in an old hunting lodge near Berchtesgaden. Taking a prominent part in the proceedings for the first time was Dr. H.O. Schumann, a man whose area of expertise would today be called alternative energy. Nevertheless, the leading figure was the medium Maria Ortisch. A second medium was also present on this occasion, the 18-year-old Sigrun. Maria Ortisch presented texts she had received from her spirit medium, one in the Sumerian alphabet and the other in the secret code of the Knights Templar. Both texts had already been translated. Were they messages from the gods? Construction plans for the development of some new advanced technology? From now on, the members of the Vril Society devoted themselves wholeheartedly to the realization of what must be one of the most bizarre ideas that ever occurred to the mind of man: the construction of the Vril levitation power unit. At the beginning of 1924, the machine was dismantled and taken to Augsburg in southern Germany for storage, perhaps to the Messerschmitt aircraft factory. As a member of the Thule Society, Rudolf Hess gave a number of lectures and was, among others, one of the people responsible for the early encouragement this new technology was accorded. In all things, we are able to recognize two principles which decide upon matter and events: light and darkness, good and evil, creation and destruction. These two principles, the creative and the destructive, determine our technical means. Another advocate of this new technology was Victor Schauberger. Your propulsion theory is a mistake. This statement was made by inventor Victor Schauberger, who was believed to be associated with these esoteric societies. It addresses one of the essential points of the issue. Nowadays, we would call this the search for an alternative form of energy. Back then, however, there was much more at stake, namely the quest for another science, a radically different technology. To put it simply, we could say implosion instead of explosion. The positive elements among the esoteric scholars of the Third Reich were aware that all divine creations have always been creative, never destructive. A technology which results in explosions and is based on the principle of destruction cannot therefore really be in keeping with divine intentions. All internal combustion engines, for example whether piston engines or rocket propulsion systems, work on the principle of an explosion, in other words with destructive capabilities. Their ultimate effect is sure to be destructive. The environmental damage meanwhile visited on the planet by the technology of explosion, including atomic energy, exhaust fumes and so on, makes it quite clear that the call for a new technology, like the one under discussion back then, is clearly justified. Victor Schauberger's experimental flying prototypes worked on the principle of levitation. Esoteric knowledge played an ever-increasing role in the search for new sources of energy and motive power. Such research as there was particularly important in the development of electrogravitational and tachometric propulsion. This seemed to be at the very core of the alternative technology. The energy source of the future, cheap, clean, and independent of raw materials. Two special departments, U-13 and SSE-4, were set up to concentrate exclusively on the realization of this new technology.
Die Intuition Johannes Keplers führte ihn zu den Geheimnissen der Pythagoreer.
The Johannes Kepler introduced him to the secrets of Pythagoras. Victor Schauberger's vibratory theories tied in with the traditional teachings of Pythagoras and Johannes Kepler. The monochord, an acoustic measuring instrument used by Pythagoras, demonstrates to us how the universe was created using sounds, which we obtain through a division of the sides. The entire universe was created using this principle of harmonic resonance. Integral numbers in proportional relationship to one another determine the structure of matter. This holds good for the universe, as well as the atom, the periodic law of elements in chemistry, the Mendelian laws of heredity, the laws of leaf arrangement in botany, as well as the formation of crystals. The list goes on. Wherever we have mathematical structures and proportions, we encounter the basic principle of the monochord, harmonic proportions. Victor Schauberger used the mathematics of the monochord in order to develop and build upon his integral skills and his knowledge of the inner universe and its vibrations. One more thing, his mathematics were not Euclidean. The secret teachings of Pythagoras were taken up by the Templar order, guarded and passed on. Victor Schauberger made use of this knowledge to develop his theories and in so doing discovered implosion. In keeping with the laws of nature, we can see here alpha and omega, the keynote to the overtone going on further to the last tone and ending in the creation of the entire universe. Symbolically, alpha and omega represent spirit and matter. Therefore, what we have here is something whole. This knowledge, therefore, makes an all-embracing science possible. Implosion is the utilization of the potential of the inner universe within the outer universe. Due to the forces of energy and evolutionary science, we have been able to make great strides in the field of antimatter, and with it do away with the effects of gravity.
Gelangen wir in den Bereich der Antimaterie und damit zur Aufhebung der Schwerkraft.
Im Juni 1934 wurde mein Vater von Reichskanzler Adolf Hitler.
In June 1934, my father was invited by the Reichschancellor Adolf Hitler to discuss his work. Hitler wanted to know about his discoveries and talk about the various possibilities and what his great plan was. And he said, yes, I'm looking for a new technology which must once again harmonize with the natural order of things. And that is my real program.
Mein Programm. Kurz vor dem Eintreffen der beiden Reichsbeauftragten.
Shortly before the meeting, Hitler, as Reichschancellor, gave the two deputies his orders. The two had come to discuss Hermann Göring's plan.
An die zwei Reichsbeauftragten von Hermann Göring Plan. Herr Viktor Schauberger, Sie werden das.
And he said, Herr Viktor Schauberger, you will speak with the two Reichs deputies, and tomorrow, or by the latest the day after tomorrow, a second meeting will take place. And he said to the two deputies, I find the plan fascinating. Yes, we Germans will bring about a whole new science.
Wir Deutschen werden eine biotechnische Szene bringen.
After the National Socialist Party came to power, the occult societies withdrew into the background. Within the SS, the Thule Society created a separate secret organization called the Black Sun. The Vril Society carried on much as before with its scientific research. According to reports, the Vril Society had by the middle of 1934 created its first experimental circular aircraft to be propelled with the anti-gravitational effect, the RFC-1. The men responsible for the design and construction were Dr. Schumann and an engineer from Bochum. Since 1929, the young Gertie Vogt had been responsible for running the Vril Society, and she made herself known to private investors who were prepared to invest in projects. The Vril and Thule societies were not alone in their vision of space travel in the Germany of those days. UFA, the German national film company, released a motion picture called The First Woman on the Moon. The first space rocket was then built by Werner von Braun and Hermann Obert with UFA movie money. Many German scientists studied the possibility of traveling to the stars. Before the end of 1934, the Vril Society had built its first light aircraft, the RFC-2 round aircraft. It was fitted with an improved Vril propulsion system and, for the first time, magnetic impulse steering. It measured hardly more than 16 feet from end to end, but it worked. It already possessed two typical characteristics of UFOs: the optical blurring of the contours when accelerating, and the colored lights depending on the level of power applied: red, orange, yellow, green, white, blue, or violet. Despite its advanced flying capabilities, the RFC-2 remained virtually unnoticed by the political leadership of the time. The same fate was to befall the first jet-propelled aircraft 4 years later, the HE-138, the HE-176, and the HE-280. Only the SS showed a slight interest in the work of the Vril Society. Its own Black Sun formation had meanwhile set up Research Department 4, SSE-4 for short, which was responsible for coming up with alternative sources of energy. What is certain is that their aim was to make Germany independent of foreign crude oil imports. Nevertheless, stimulated by Viktor Schauberger and the success of the latest Vril success, SSE-4 now began to construct its own light aircraft. Using Captain Hans Kohler's tachyometer converter as a basis, and appropriating many Vril components, they developed their own Thule aero engine. Towards the end of 1938, they had constructed a small propeller-driven light aircraft, the RFC-4, with the express purpose of observing how disc-shaped objects behave in flight. By 1939, the SS had already built its RFC-5, the first long-distance aircraft measuring more than 65 feet, and with the mysterious name Haunebu-1. Under tight security, the Haunebu-1 made its maiden flight, in all probability, in August of 1939. Documents show that by 1941, the British had already found out about these top-secret SS experiments. In contrast to the simple Vril prototype, the Haunebu was a complicated proposition. However, because of the form of its power unit, it offered considerably more storage space. In 1939, Hitler made one of his biggest mistakes. What might have been meant to be a limited military action, the Polish campaign, led directly to the Second World War. Quite contrary to what we might imagine the situation to be in the perfectly organized National Socialist state, everyone did exactly as he pleased. The Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and the industrial concerns all followed their own inclinations. Competition for armaments contracts became intense. As a result, alternative methods of propulsion found themselves in direct competition with their more conventional counterparts. A sort of compromise was achieved with experimental flying saucers like the RFC-7.
Wir haben Transporte gemacht, auch vom Kampfgeschwader 26.
The 26th Fighter Squadron had been ordered to fly from Kiel to Norway in order to resupply the 30 Fighter Squadron of the Bambach Command. On the return flight to Hamburg, I took a model of my aircraft design with me, and taking advantage of the opportunity, actually had it forwarded to Ernst Udet in the Reichs Air Ministry in Berlin.
Zum Abschicken zum Reichsluftfahrtministerium nach Berlin an Udet. Udet hat dieses Modell
Udet passed this model on to the research establishment in Peenemünde, where tests were later carried out. Over and over again, I later heard reports from people who were working in Prague on the construction of flying discs, and progress in this field was actually being made. I also knew that Habermohl and Schriever were in possession of my model and had begun work on its practical applications.
Habermohl und Schriever mein Modell praktisch bekommen hätten. Zum Ausarbeiten, zum Rekonstruieren. Und diese Flugscheibe hat der Schriever auf seine Art, seine Gedanken umgebaut. Während ich
Schriever made certain alterations to my plans, whereas, as I was later to ascertain, Habermohl had remained true to my original design. The second prototype was a flying disc, 42 meters long, and was built by Miete Belluzzo in Breslau.
42 Meter große Flugscheibe wurde gebaut durch Miete und Belluzzo. Und zwar in Breslau. Und diese Flugscheibe sollte dann, wie ich dann erfahren habe, sollte dann nach Spitzbergen geflogen werden.
This flying disc, as I discovered, was flown to Spitzbergen in Norway and should have returned to Rechlin on a directional beam with an unknown transmission frequency and code word.
Für den Sender, was überhaupt gar nicht benutzt wurde von anderen, sollte auf diesen Richtstrahl die Flugscheibe.
However, due to a bad landing in Spitzbergen, it was damaged and was unable to complete the return flight home.
Die ist heftig abgestoßen und konnte dann nicht mehr zurückfliegen. Dann bin ich rausgefahren.
After that, I drove into the hills just outside Prague, where the secret testing ground was supposed to have been located. I had my Leica A camera with me when suddenly I saw such a flying saucer. I was wounded at the time, so I know that it was November, December, although the test flight was not due to take place until the following February. Someone had made an unscheduled test flight, and this is what I saw coming towards me. It had no wings, absolutely none. I took a photo and wound on the film, but it was already directly over me. Then I took a second photo, and I could see that it was a flying gyroscope, a flying saucer.
Apart from the conventionally powered flying saucers to be seen at this time, there were indeed other UFOs cruising the skies. A small Vril RFC-2 had been in service as a reconnaissance aircraft since the end of 1940. This rare photograph shows an RFC-2 in the skies over the southern Atlantic, on the way to a rendezvous with the auxiliary cruiser Atlantis in the waters of the Antarctic. Individual sightings of the first RFC-6 Haunebu II were also reported. In July 1941, work began on this Schriever-Habermohl flying gyroscope, a jet-propelled vertical takeoff light aircraft. By the end of 1942, the first practical tests could begin. However, there were serious design faults in the first prototype. The same year, Dr. Richard Miete began work on a turbine-driven light aircraft, the RFC-7T. This was to be discus and not saucer-shaped. The Italian scientist Giuseppe Belluzzo soon joined this project, followed shortly afterwards by Schriever and Habermohl. They worked together to produce a functional, reliable light aircraft. And so, on the 17th of April 1945, Richard Miete was able to report to Adolf Hitler, "Today, under my direction, and in the presence of 3 Luftwaffe officers, the V-7 was tested in the skies above the Baltic." The general characteristics and attainable performance of the aircraft were as follows. The V-7 was a supersonic helicopter fitted with 12 BMW 028 turbo aggregate engines. During the first test flight, it reached an altitude of 78,000 feet, and on the second, rose to 80,000 feet.
Over the years, I've had the privilege of being a friend and colleague of the late American Naval Admiral Delfarny, who was instrumental in bringing many of the German scientists to the United States at the end of World War II. As many of you know, there was an executive order given by President Truman in August of 1945, August 15th, 45. And in March of 1946, the State Naval War Committee authorized the collection of German materials relating to experiments of high technology. The operation, known as Paperclip, was to bring sequestered German scientists privately to the United States in the hope that the Americans could begin a quick start, a catch-up in the areas of V1 and V2 testing. Clearly, the Germans were involved with the building of what many allies considered miracle weapon systems, development of what some experts will call the Feuerkugel, the fiery ball, or the disc-like hovercraft that the Germans were experimenting with during World War II, which was known to American intelligence and yet not really appreciated until the Germans began to cooperate with the Americans following World War II.
Now let's return to those people who right from the start were responsible for this. In the winter of 1942, a new light aircraft circled the Vril testing ground, the Vril 1. A single-seater with an overall length of 36 feet. In other words, the dimensions of a fighter aircraft, which was what the Vril was intended to be. This also holds true for the armaments. 3 30mm caliber Mk108s and 2 MG17s. While the Vril 1 was being developed and constructed, significant strides must have been made in the attempts to make transmedial contact. There were definite plans already at hand for the construction of a much larger aircraft, the Vril 7. In comparison to Vril technology, the Miete-Belluzzo and Schriever-Habermohl projects were really still quite conventional. Strange tracks in the perpetual ice. They compel us to take notice of an episode in history that crops up over and over again in connection with German UFOs. The German Antarctic expedition of 1938. In that year, under the personal command of Hermann Göring, an unusual expedition was planned. The operation involving the seaplane carrier Schwabenland had been given the mission of conquering land in the Antarctic. The expedition was a success, resulting in an area of 229,000 square miles being claimed for Germany as Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. New Swabia is not just an ordinary tract of the Antarctic. It is a land with ice-free mountains and lakes, a habitable land which had never before been visited by any foreign expedition. Whole fleets of submarines are thought to have been ordered to New Swabia shortly before the end of the war, among them the advanced types 21 and 23. Towards the end of 1942, the department SSE-4 allegedly began work on a new improved version of the Haunebu UFO, the Haunebu 2. This drawing shows the basic layout, including the power plant and fuselage. The exterior shape could vary. The dimensions of the Haunebu 2 varied from craft to craft, from an overall length of between 85 and 100 feet, and a height of between 30 and 36 feet at the center. It was said to be capable of a top speed within the Earth's atmosphere of 3,200 knots. The Haunebu 2 was also in all probability capable of space travel. Some versions of the Haunebu 2 already show signs of their combat readiness with the Donar ray gun, which at that time was still in the design stage. This drawing shows the layout of the crew cabin, enough room for a very, very long journey. And if the reports are correct, there was even a 230-foot-long Haunebu 3. Just before the end of the Second World War, Department SSE-4 planned to build its own gigantic UFO space station. It was to have been assembled in the old Zeppelin hangars. Its name, the Andromeda machine. Weights of more than 100 metric tons wouldn't have posed any difficulty to the Vril gravitational engine.
If we look back at the history of the ancient Near East, keeping in mind that the German philosophers were some of the best Orientalists, the work of Friedrich Delitzsch, who was one of the foremost Assyriologists. In his book, Bibel und Babel, the study of Babylon and the Bible, we acknowledge a reference to flying spacecraft. We have the same concepts in the Sanskrit traditions of the Vimana. The Germans were clearly well aware throughout the history of some 12 to 6,000 to 3,000 years, depending upon Oriental and Near Eastern history, that these craft did exist. That is to say, that gives German experts the ability to make expeditions to Kashmir and to the South Pole suddenly appear on the scene. Obviously, there are higher connections.
Many expeditions were mounted before and even during the war. Not just in the Near East, but also as far afield as South America, such as this one led by Edmund Kiss. And in the remotest regions of Asia, under the leadership of the famous Swedish explorer Sven Hedin. It was the search for traces of a higher knowledge.
Da war mein Ziel immer die unbekannten Teile von Asien, wo die Karten das verlockende...
My aim was always those unknown parts of Asia, where the maps bore that enticing word unexplored over the white expanses. Such were the areas of Inner Asia and Tibet that I've always sought out. That is to say, I've always had a feeling and a belief that in the middle of the desert, where there was not a soul to be found, and where there were no roads, perhaps there could I discover traces of some ancient civilization.
If we look at human history, we see throughout the documents of Sumeria, of Ebla in Syria, even the Old Testament book of Ezekiel, Chapter 1 speaks of the wheel within the wheel, so there's very clear evidence.
Throughout the world, in the ancient manuscripts of lost civilizations, we are confronted over and over again with tales of space-traveling gods.
we know that in the early parts of the war, there were certain factions of the Allied forces that did not believe he had a secret weapon. And it wasn't until the Americans made much emphasis of this that they began to look at it seriously, and indeed did discover that Hitler not only had a secret weapon, he had what we would call today a UFO or spacecraft. He had one already off of the drawing board and flying, and it was capable of 1,200 miles an hour, vertical takeoff, 90-degree changes, and much like a helicopter, and of course was far superior to anything the Allied powers had at that time. Secondly, they knew that he had another craft about to be up and going. It was capable of doing 2,500 miles an hour, which was double the original. And not only did it have the characteristics of the original craft, but it also had a laser weapon aboard it that was capable of penetrating 4 inches of armor. Now, needless to say that that really spooked the Allied forces into making a redemptive attempt against him and bringing him into a state of capitulation.
Some people actually maintain that there is a German UFO base in the Antarctic. Amazing tales. There is, however, something concrete to go on. Why did the Allies under Admiral Byrd mount an invasion of the Antarctic?
I say this as a strong possibility, having seen the film that was made in 1947 with Admiral Byrd and Admiral Wood. I had the opportunity to actually see portions of this film, and what struck me was the fact that there was a significant military contingent that went down to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd. Why was it necessary to bring some 4,000 soldiers, a battleship, an aircraft carrier, and a support team to go into an area if it was purely a geological/geophysical exploration? Clearly there were other unknown factors there.
Admiral Byrd later explained to the press that in the event of another war, the hard facts were that we would have to reckon with an attack from aircraft that could fly from pole to pole.